This is CHSR
Yeah, you can. Oh,
97.9
sorry.
FM here in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada. This is Python's Paradise, your film and music show, and this is your host, Craig Gilbert, aka the Python Hyena. And folks, we're on episode 200 here on Python's Paradise, and you know what? I can't think of a better way to celebrate it than do a tribute to the late, great father of the zombie movies himself, George A. Romero. And I have his lovely wife, Suzanne Desrocher. No, gee, I'm going to get that wrong, am I?
Desrocher.
Desrocher. I apologize.
That's okay. You're not the only one.
Well, you know what? First off, it was a delight to meet you at Horrorama. I'd never been outside New Brunswick, and it was Lisa Langlois, who's been on my show a couple times, told me to come to Horrorama, and she wanted me to be her assistant. And so it was my first trip out of New Brunswick, went to Toronto, had a blast. Lisa was my Toronto culture, and it was a delight to meet you and John Harrison and John Russo, and it was just fantastic.
Oh, good. I know that Toronto often gets such a bad rap, for being, so big and so dominant in Canada's sort of cityscapes. But really, we're not that bad, and it was a pleasure to meet you, and it's always a pleasure to talk about my husband, George Romero.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Lisa gave me my first taste of the subway and the shuttle buses. All that was so new to me, because I don't know if you've ever been out here to New Brunswick, you and George, but it's a little province, just an hour ahead of you in terms of time zone, but we don't have that kind of stuff here.
No, and that's okay, because you have other wonderful attributes. I know, though, that you're probably getting a nasty winter, are you?
Yes, we are. We are. You're right.
Yeah.
You ever been here before?
I have, but George has not.
George wasn't going to do Living Dead in New Brunswick?
He would not have been adverse to it. It's just, we kind of ran out of time. He loved Montreal, which is my hometown,
Yeah.
and we've been to Vancouver, we've been to Calgary. I really wanted him to see Banff, and I wanted him to see Quebec City, and of course, New Brunswick and Halifax, because I'm a big Canadian. I'm a big patriot. George was a proud Canadian. He could not have said more positive things about our country. He was extremely proud to be a Canadian, and it makes me feel very good about that, because I sponsored him in 2007, and he became a permanent resident in 2008. And then he made 6 of his last movies in Canada.
And we're proud to have him.
I know.
And you know what? I could just see the zombies dealing with our weather here in New Brunswick.
Well, I have to tell you something, Greg. People, on the set would say, Suze, listen, when you're seeing him writing, could you tell him, palm trees, beach, something like that, because, often, we were all on sets that were, of course, in Canada, and, in our climate, not so wonderful. But other than the fact that we are latitudinally challenged, he loved making movies up here. He thought the crews were great, and, just loved it.
I love the little flesh doll you had.
Oh, thank you. The plushies, yeah, the little Georges, they're really very cute.
I love the look of them, the gray hair, the white beard, and those thick black rimmed glasses. They're just a really cool look.
Yeah, the iconic look. He also, had the whitest running shoes, and, he always kept his pants somehow shorter than they should have been, and So we have all the little details that made him who he was, sort of his look. So, but Greg, when we were home, when it was just us two kids, he never wore his glasses. His eyes were 20/20. They were better than mine.
Oh, fantastic!
So he wore the glasses because it was his look. It was his work look. And but when I was home with him, he never wore those glasses.
Yeah. Well, you know what? It's interesting because on Boxing Day last year, I interviewed the gorgeous, beautiful Tracy Savage of Friday the 13th, Part 3. And I asked her, I said, tell me about any stories you had at the conventions. And she hadn't done very many, but she said when she was young, she was terrified of Night of the Living Dead. She said she had just an awful experience with that movie, and she did one of the conventions that George Romero was at, and she said she had to meet him, and she said it was one of the few times she did a photo with another celebrity, and she said she had to meet him and tell him how much he impacted her childhood. And I thought that was a nice tribute to your husband.
For sure. And he affected a lot of people. And the demographics that he impacted is also quite astonishing because it was his first film was made in 1968, so of course people that went to watch those movies were fairly older now. But he would get young little boys and girls who were playing Call of Duty or the Call of the Dead video game, and he's the antagonist. So his fans or the people that really enjoyed George Romero, went from 7, 8 years old to 80 something. So It's astonishing.
Isn't it amazing? Night of the Living Dead is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. Wow.
Yeah, wow. And it still plays really well. It's still a creepy film.
Yep.
In fact, I think it's the creepiest film he's made. I know the fan favorite, of course, is Dawn, which I have to admit I don't love, but I'm more a Day of the Dead person.
Okay.
But I think Night of the Living Dead is a classic. It deserves it. It's creepy. It's a wonderful film, and it's his first film, and for a filmmaker to hit a home run on your first shot is quite rare.
It's amazing too because Night of the Living Dead was listed to be in public domain, and it got a lot of screenings and whatnot. And I guess Romero, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I heard that didn't bother him.
It didn't. It bothered Image 10, the company or the group that produced the film. It bothered them more, but it didn't bother George so much because, as it turns out, people saw that movie.
Yep. And
because it was in public domain, it was available for people to see. So at the end of the day, it was a good thing. And and George was able to make he made other films, and it was a great place to start because he had made this sort of cult film, and but he wasn't upset about it. I think he kind of benefited from it.
Yeah. Well, I loved his attitude. It was a very kind attitude, I think, because any other filmmaker could have just come down on it, but he did not, and I respect that about him.
Well, he was a very kind man. I do think, though, that he felt that it was a mistake. It was an inadvertent mistake. It was made by ignorance and just not as young filmmakers, they just didn't know, and it just happened. But at the end, I think it may have helped his career. But he made other films. He made 17 features, and so he wasn't so, he wasn't so angry about it as, anger is a strong word. I think just people, Image 10, who produced that film, would have been in a different position had it not been in public domain.
Well, it's celebrating its 50th anniversary, and I know Judith O'Dea is still around. I think I'm going to reach out and see if she'll come on my show, but
I'm sure she will.
I'm
lovely, and I'm sure she will.
I'm wondering, if George has seen her since, does he ever say, "They're coming to get you, Barbara"?
Yeah. No, not really. But of course, it's one of those iconic phrases. It's just. Yeah, I'm going to come. They're going to come and get you, Barbara. It's just part of our part of the lexicon of films, and it's amazing.
And it's interesting too because the hero of Night of the Living Dead is an African American, and and he ends up. I won't give away the ending, but it was kind of tragic in the end. But that was very, very rare to see that kind of thing in a movie, and I think it was a great way to go.
Well, it was, but again, it was pretty well not accidental, but it was. Listen, George was 1968. He was, a peace and love, and he just never felt that, having the best actor in his entourage be the lead. He never considered it to be astonishing in any way. He just said, "Hey, Dwayne." And Dwayne was like, "Okay, sure," and so it was innocent, really. And as it turns out, Martin Luther King was assassinated, and so a lot of things sort of fell into place. And as it turns out, in retrospect, it was. It was a wonderful thing that the protagonist was black, African American, but it was really accidental, and it was innocently done, and that actually makes it even more special because it wasn't calculated. It was just, hey, you're the best actor we know, and it doesn't matter whether you're purple or black or green. It was just do the role. But as it turns out, it was a pioneering move.
How did George deal with censorship? Because I know his movies were heavily scrutinized by the censors.
Yeah, he didn't like censorship.
No, I agree.
Yeah. Even though I think that in his later years he would have said that censorship has its place, but at the time people were so, their knickers were in a knot, and I think that he resented that. And Dawn of the Dead, for instance, was done by Dario Argento, the Italian version, and then of course the American version had a lot less cut out, than Dario's. And
I love Dario Argento.
Yeah, he's a very cool guy.
Yeah.
And he also was an impactful young filmmaker.
Yeah, Suspiria, Deep Red. Yep.
Sure.
Yep.
Yeah, and and Dario is a character, and George was invited by Dario to go to Rome and write Dawn, and it was just a wonderful experience, and so they did both their versions, and and I think the American version actually is better. Like I told you, I'm not a huge fan of the film, but I think I'm the only person on this planet who doesn't think that's a great film. So
why?
Yeah, I just find it kind of. And I'm afraid to express myself because even though I expressed myself to George, and who was very open to my opinion, I don't know. I'm hesitating to tell you how I feel because
that's okay. I'm not criticizing you.
I understand that I really am the only person who doesn't like that film.
Well, it's also celebrating an anniversary, 40 years this year.
Yeah. I'm more of a Day of the Dead fan. I think that film is sensational. I really do. And I also happen to think Land of the Dead is good. And I also have an affinity to Diary. I think they're those three films, and of course Night. So those would be the four films. And here's another thing too. I have to say, I did not know who George was when I met him.
Okay.
So, I'm not really his demographic. And so when he invited me to see a rough cut of Land, I was terrified because I thought, oh my God, I'm going to think it's horrible, and I got to be honest, but yet I need to, be polite. So I was super duper nervous about it. And I saw the rough, and I understood, of course, it was the rough, and at the end, I said, he looked at me and he said, so, what did you think? And I went, not that bad. And I have to say, he glowed because I think he understood, even though he didn't know me very well at the time, I think he understood that I was not his demographic. And the fact that I, didn't think it was that bad. He was proud of that, and then George and I saw Land again on big screen about 3 years ago, and we both looked at each other and went, great. I mean, it really plays very well. It's very fast paced, and it's a good movie.
It's funny because you got. Speaking of Dario Argento, Asia Argento was in that, and Dennis Hopper.
Yeah.
Dennis Hopper.
And he knew her when he was in Rome.
Yeah.
Working on Dawn, and she was just a little girl. She was a little pumpkin. She was 4 or 5 years old, and then suddenly he's in Toronto and he's shooting Land, and she's the starlet or the star, and so it's just funny.
So Dawn of the Dead doesn't inspire you to go shopping?
Well, I have to also say I'm not a big shopper, so yeah, no. And yet I do understand the political metaphors, and I do understand the fact that consumer is. I totally get it. I just find it a little cheesy, a little. I don't know. I have to say, I'm loath to say I should, as his wife, I should say that I loved everything he did. But yeah, it's
that's
not my
okay.
favorite. Yeah.
Well, I want to ask you about a bunch of his other films too. So,
sure.
I know after he did Night of the Living Dead, he and Judith Ridley also worked again on There's Always Vanilla, which is not a big film, but I wanted to ask about that one because he kind of shifted gears there.
He did. George was not afraid to shift gears.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the problem is that, once he made Dawn, everybody wanted him to keep making Dawn.
Yeah.
And he just didn't want to always make Dawn of the Dead. He wanted to shift gears. And, Season of the Witch, and, he also didn't want to be a horror genre director.
Okay.
He didn't. He just wanted to make films. Mm-hmm. And, one of his, bucket list or desires as a filmmaker was to get his, get a shot at making Tarzan or Dracula, so he didn't want to necessarily be pigeonholed as a horror director. He was fine with it, grateful that he was able to make films, because it's a hard business. It's hard to get, financing, and it's just a hard business. And so he was very grateful and very, accommodating to, that's my cell. Sorry. So he just didn't want to be known as a horror genre director, but as it turns out, that's what he was. And, and Hollywood finally gave him his star, in just a few months ago, and he just didn't really want to be that, but he was grateful that he was able to make films.
So There's Always Vanilla wasn't quite as well received as Night of the Living Dead, huh?
No, but it's a good film, and he he didn't have a lot of money and all that stuff, but it's still a good film. And the only film he made that he felt that if he had an opportunity to remake, he would be glad to do that with Season of the Witch.
Okay, I was just going to mention that. Okay,
yeah.
What was the issue with that one now?
I think they just didn't have enough money, and the script was, haphazard. I think they got it done, but it was a bit of a, I don't know. He just really felt that it was a fail, and they obviously got it in the can and had it sort of out there. But of all the films that he's made, he felt that one could have been a lot better, and he thought it was a good project. In fact, I'm considering getting it remade now, and we're looking to see what we can do about that.
Okay.
Because it's a very sort of timely film. It's a film about women and a woman being abused by her husband. I mean, so it's timely, and I think it would play well today.
Yep.
And if you could get, enough financing and get the actors and sort of revamp it so that it's more today, but it really doesn't even have to do, that much revamping. We just sort of have to tweak it here and there. But really, it's a timely film, and it was the only film he felt that he made that was not so good.
What about the Crazies? I know that got remade.
It did, but his is better.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
It really is, and it's not that the other wasn't. It was very nicely done. It's just that who you kind of just knew who was crazy.
Yeah.
And his film, the whole reason he made that film, and the reason the film is so good, is that you really don't know who's crazy. Is it the government, or is it the people? You're confused as to who's the bad guy or the evil, or but in the Crazies, the remake, you kind of know right away because they kind of look different and they look zombie-like, and
yeah.
But it was apparently very well received. We had a private screening of it, and it was fine, but it just wasn't. It wasn't Mr. Romero's film.
No. Well, let's talk a little bit about Tom Savini, because he did the great gore effects for Dawn of the Dead. Speaking of vampires, Martin, of course, Savini's debut, and Knight Rider. I mean, he worked with Savini a lot for good reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was very good. And
I love Savini and Dawn of the Dead. He was one of the bikers that came in there.
yeah, no, first of all, he's a very friendly and a wonderful person, and talented at what he does, and he was obviously an asset to George and his films, and so it's just like it was just basically a no-brainer relationship. You know, you know, and he actually he had been you know, George went to see him in a show, this young man in a show, and he was terrific, and so he was already on George's radar. And then at one point he comes to George's office, the elevator door opens, and George is at his desk, and Savini comes in, and he's got this he's got this horrifying, you know, knife with the blood, and he just does this whole exposition right in front of George, and George was like, oh my God. and then it was like, oh, okay, yes, I totally remember you, because I saw you in this theater, and it was in this play, and you were wonderful. And anyway, so you know, Savini sort of reinforced his talents, so to speak. And so they had a relationship, and you know, Tom was a photographer in the Vietnam War.
Yep.
So he had some empirical, you know, evidence, or he kind of knew what gore looked like, so to speak. And was able to recreate it, and not only was he able to do that, but he was also very quick-witted. And if there was problems on the set, he could solve problems. And you know, sometimes they would have. There was a special time where in Dawn where there was a continuity issue, and they realized that the vest wasn't on, and you know, and then Tom would say, okay, we're going to get this guy, and we're going to put and then the screwdriver zombie. I don't know if you remember the screwdriver zombie.
Yeah, well,
it was very sort of spontaneously created, so that they could tie in the continuity issue that they had. And Tom was, you know, he was a problem solver on the set. And, you know, it was just, you know, he was integral.
Yeah.
He was integral to, and you know, in those days, computer graphics, the last 3-4 films George did, computer graphics played a large role. But in those days, it just wasn't available, so you had to do your own. Mm-hmm. And you had to wipe it out if it didn't work. You know, you had to wash it all off and start anew, because, you know, it was a messy business. And if you didn't get it right the first time, you had to start again, clean it all up, start fresh. And, of course, that's 3-4 hours.
Well, I got a few films I want to ask about. We'll try to do them quick. But
okay.
Martin, any thoughts on that?
Martin is a great film.
Mm-hmm.
It's George's favorite film.
Okay.
He loved that film. He felt that as a filmmaker, he was able to do everything he wanted to do.
Okay.
Every shot, he just had full creative sovereignty, and he loved that. He just loved making that film, and he loved that film. It's his favorite film.
Okay.
Of the zombies, or not so much the zombies. Yeah, no, that's his favorite film.
Good call.
Pardon?
Good call. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Night Riders. That's a different shift for him.
Yeah, Night Riders again. Another changing of the gears.
Mm-hmm.
He loved. It was a difficult shoot.
Mm-hmm.
There was climate, and there was like, the set got blown from a sort of a like a mini tornado, so the set was sort of ruined, and they had to sort of rebuild it. But I think that Night Riders, when I would speak to him about it, he said that it was the film that felt the most friendly, and he had an emotional attachment to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. What about Creepshow?
Well, Creepshow was fun, and he was, worked with Stephen King.
Yep.
He loved that. It was his first time that he was working with, stars,
Yep.
people of a significant stature.
Anybody out of those stars that really made an impression on him?
No, I think, well, actually, I'm trying to, the guy who did Airport.
Oh, Leslie Nielsen.
Leslie, yes.
Yeah.
He found him to be funny, charming.
Mm-hmm.
He was fun on the set. I think it, he was impressed by everybody, and but I think he really liked Leslie.
I've had Adrienne Barbeau on here too.
No, and
yeah.
Adrienne, but Adrienne was a personal friend,
Mm-hmm.
and so yes, in his personal life,
Mm-hmm.
Adrienne certainly would have been the most impactful. But outside of his personal, I think he really liked Leslie.
Don't blame him. Got two more.
He was fun.
Yeah.
Apparently, he had this like little fart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I heard about that. He had a little fart buzzer. Yep.
Yeah, so he'd shake your hand, and then he'd do a little fart, and everybody would look, and they ha ha ha. So he was a bit of a jokester, prankster. He was a fun sort of good-humored guy.
Two more films I want to ask about. One is Monkey Shines.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Well, again, that was his first film with producer Peter Grunwald, his partner,
Mm-hmm.
and his new partner after Richard Rubenstein, and that was their first foray. And it was a difficult film, especially when you're dealing with animals. Animals are always tricky.
Yep.
But he was very impressed with these monkeys, and so it was difficult, and but he liked the film. It's an interesting film. Yeah.
And the last one I want to ask, of course, is The Dark Half.
Yeah, The Dark Half. Again, another Stephen King.
Mm-hmm.
He had troubles with that film. He had trouble with the lead actor. It was a troublesome film to do. Once they got past sort of the difficult personality issues, he thought it turned out quite well. But yeah, it was not. It would actually probably be his worst experience as a filmmaker.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, but it happens. Sometimes, it just, it's a job, and it doesn't always go as well as you'd like, and it was troublesome, and so yeah. But at the end, it turned out okay, and but it wasn't. I would say it was his least favorite.
Well,
but not because he didn't like the film. It's just making it wasn't so much fun.
Yeah. Well, what was great to meet you at Horrorama, and
it was great to meet you as well.
And of course, John Harrison. I went to his film Effects when it played there, and
right.
Yep, and met John Russo, and that was that what kind of experience? You must have had a wonderful time.
At Horrorama?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, first of all, I love John, and George loved John, and George and John had a terrific relationship, and his composing of of the music, and at the end, George. John, second and first AD'd a couple of George's films, and he was on the set. He was a producer for Diary and a producer for Survival. So they were not just workmates, but they were friends, and I have a great relationship with John to this day. I spoke to him yesterday at length. So he was a friend, a good friend, and George loved him, and I do too.
I'm going to be reaching out to him soon to do this show because he gave me his information.
Oh, good. Well,
yeah.
He will do it because he's a lovely, lovely man and extremely talented, and we love him.
Just one last thing.
Sure.
When you did these conventions, I'm sure you did them with George, what's the most interesting, intriguing thing he's ever had to sign?
He would be requested to do signing, because people wanted tattoos.
Okay, yeah, I've heard of these.
Yeah, and he never wanted to sign. First of all, he was not a big tattoo guy. In fact, he was kind of opposed to it. So he would never sign body parts. He'd say, "I'll sign your T-shirt, I'll sign your piece of paper, I'll sign a video or a LP or a DVD, but I won't sign a body part because people would say, well, just if you sign me on my arm, I'll get it tattooed," and he wasn't all that keen. I can't think of anything. I can't think of anything really strange, except that most people were lovely, and they admired him, and he would spend, I don't even know, it wasn't a time thing, but he would spend the time and look into your eyes and really have that conversation, have that connection with you as a fan, and he was just a lovely person, and he was very humble, and there was not 1 minute of arrogance to his bones. I mean, he was just that kind of guy, and and people would wait in line for hours, and he would just spend that quality time with you, and he would listen to your story about how, oh my God, when I was 7 or I was 10 or me and my sister or me and my mom, or all the stories that affected them. He would listen, and he would say, "I'm sorry that I scared you." So he was just a really lovely, lovely man.
Did you have any charities or websites or anything like that you wanted to plug on here?
No, not really.
Okay.
No, not really. Except for the plushies. Otherwise, no. And I'm about to do a floating film festival in Pittsburgh on one of those little boats in one of the 3 rivers in Pittsburgh, and we're going to do a George Romero Film Festival there. That. But unfortunately, we don't have a charity, but maybe that's a good idea.
Okay. No, I always let people plug websites and whatnot on here, or upcoming projects or anything like that. So,
no, just the film festival in Pittsburgh in 2018. I think we're going to do it in September.
Okay.
We're looking to see if we can pull this off. And and like I said, the plushies, of course, because they're just so cute.
Yep.
And if you're a fan and you want to have a little George A, near you, it's so much fun.
Well, I'll tell you what. You send me an email, your address, and I'll send you a money order, and I'll get that. I'll get that taken care
That
of.
would be lovely, and I appreciate it, and you're going to enjoy them.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, before I let you go, would you mind doing a plug for my show?
Sure. So,
Shoot.
hi guys, I'm Suzanne Desrocher Romero, and I want you guys to pay attention and listen to Python Paradise in New Brunswick, Canada.
Yeah.
Enjoy it.
Yes.
And stay scared.
Yeah. Well, too bad we didn't get George Romero, get the Trailer Park Boys in one of those Living Dead movies. Could you imagine that?
Yeah. Yeah, that would have been great, for sure.
It would have been funny. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome, Greg.
We are celebrating my 200th episode, honoring George A. Romero, the 50th anniversary of Night of the Living Dead, and the 40th anniversary of Dawn of the Dead, and plus his whole career, because he was just a great guy.
Really great. Congratulations.
Absolutely. God bless you, and you have yourself a wonderful day.
Have a good night, folks.